Think about your morning routine. You woke up, reached for your phone, and spent 30 seconds scrolling through your feed. Maybe you liked something. Maybe you shared it. Maybe you watched a video all the way to the end. In those 30 seconds, someone made money. Not you. The platform did. Your attention, your data, your preferences, your relationships, all of it fed into a system designed to extract value from the most ordinary moments of your social life. You weren't using the app was using you. This isn't a new problem. It's a very old problem in a new technological form, and understanding how we got here, from the 19th century factory floor to the 21st century social media platform, is essential to understanding why cyberpunk emerged when it did, and why its critique of corporate power still cuts so close to the bone. Today we're building the economic framework that will let us read our texts at a deeper level. We've already examined who counts as human, how the self is constructed, and whose futures get imagined. Now we're asking who benefits from all this technological transformation and who pays the cost. By the end of this discussion, you should be able to do three things. First, trace the evolution of labor from industrial capitalism through the contemporary digital economy. Second, explain how the concept of free labor extends and complicates traditional Marxist ideas about exploitation. And third, apply this economic framework to the cyberpunk texts we've already studied. We have to start with Marx, not because he had all the answers, but because every subsequent theorist in this conversation is in dialogue with him. And to understand what those latter theorists are updating, you need to understand what they're building on. In 1844, a 26-year-old Karl Marx was writing notes that would not be published for nearly a century. These manuscripts, known as the Economic and Philosophical Manuscripts of 1844, contain his theory of what he called estranged or alienated labor. The core insight is this: under capitalism, the worker becomes systematically separated from what should be most fundamentally their own. Marx identifies four forms of this separation. First, the worker is estranged from the product of their labor. You spend 8 hours making something, a shoe, a widget, a line of code, and that thing does not belong to you. It belongs to whoever owns the factory. The product of your labor, quote, confronts the worker as something alien, as a power independent of the producer. The object you created has become your enemy. Second, the worker is estranged from the act of labor itself. Work under capitalism is not freely chosen or self-expressive. It is coerced. Marx writes that the worker, quote, only feels himself outside his work, and in his work feels outside himself. He feels at home when he's not working, and when he is working, he does not feel at home. Third, and this is the one that has the most philosophical weight for this course, the worker is estranged from what Marx calls their species being. This is his term for the capacity that makes us distinctively human, the ability to engage in free, conscious, creative activity. Animals produce only according to their immediate physical needs. A beaver builds a dam because its survival requires it. Human beings, Marx argues, can produce according to the standard of any species. We can create things that are not necessary, that are beautiful, that express something about who we are. Alienated labor takes that capacity and turns it into a mere means of survival. Our uniquely human creativity gets reduced to a commonality. And fourth, estranged labor separates us from other human beings. When your relationship to your own work is one of coercion and alienation, that estrangement spreads outward into every social relationship. What makes Marx's analysis so durable is that he isn't just describing individual misery. He's describing a structural condition built into how capitalism operates. The more wealth the worker produces, the less they retain. This is not an accident or a malfunction. It's the logic of the system. Marx was writing about a world of factories, mine shafts, and 12-hour workdays. By the late 20th century, that world had changed dramatically. The factory hadn't disappeared, it had moved, primarily to the global south, as we've previously discussed. But the dominant mode of economic production in the overdeveloped world had shifted towards something else, something harder to name. In their 2000 book Empire, the political theorists Michael Hardt and Antonio Negri argue that we have moved from what philosopher Michel Foucault called the disciplinary society to what Guy Deleuze called the society of control. In a disciplinary society, power operates through enclosed institutions, the factory, the school, the prison, the hospital. You move through these spaces and each one molds you, disciplines your body, regulates your behavior. The factory produces not just goods, but the factory worker, punctual, obedient, efficient. In the society of control, those walls dissolve. Power no longer operates by enclosing you in an institution, but by following you everywhere, pervading the network of your social life. The corporation replaces the factory as the paradigmatic institution, and it doesn't need walls because the logic of the market internalizes control. You discipline yourself. You optimize yourself. You hustle. Hardt and Negri introduced the concept of biopolitical production to describe this shift. Under biopolitical capitalism, what gets produced is not just goods and services, but life itself. Social relationships, knowledge, communication, affect. Capital has colonized not just your labor hours, but your desires, your sociability, your creativity. Life is made to work for production, and production is made to work for life. This is where the concept of immaterial labor becomes essential. Hardt and Negri draw on the Italian autonomist tradition, distinguished between two forms. There is labor that produces informational or knowledge-based content, data analysis, programming, design. And there is labor that produces affective or relational content, care work, customer service, emotional support, social connection. In the contemporary economy, both of these have become central to value production. And crucially, both are increasingly difficult to separate from life in any ordinary sense of the word. This matters for how we read cyberpunk. We noted in our very first discussion that cyberpunk's protagonists are hackers and couriers and smugglers, people who work at the margins of a corporate world. Case in Neuromancer is the perfect avatar of immaterial labor. He is, to borrow a phrase, a symbolic analyst who manipulates information rather than making physical things. But as we saw, his immaterial labor doesn't free him. He is literally enslaved by toxin sacs in his bloodstream, forced to work for interests he barely understands. Gibson knew in 1984 that the shift from physical to immaterial labor would not mean liberation. It would mean new, subtler forms of bondage. In 2000, the cultural theorist Tiziana Terranova published an essay called Free Labor that has only grown more relevant in the 25 years since. She was writing about the early internet, the world of chat rooms, volunteer moderators, fan sites, and open source software. But she identified a dynamic that would come to define the social media era: the systematic extraction of value from unpaid, willingly given digital labor. Terranova calls this free labor, and the double meaning is intentional. It is free in the sense of not being financially compensated, and it is free in the sense of being freely, voluntarily given. People build websites because they enjoy it. They moderate forums because they care about the community. They create fan art and fan fiction because they love the source material. The desire is genuine. The creativity is real. And capital exploits exactly those genuine desires. Her example is striking. In 1996, at the height of what she calls the volunteer moment, more than 30,000 community leaders were helping AOL, then the most popular internet service provider, function, moderating chats, welcoming new members, organizing events, generating at least $7 million of value per month for free. When a handful of those volunteers sued, asking whether they were owed back wages, they were making visible a form of exploitation that the celebratory rhetoric of the early internet had carefully obscured. Terranova draws on the Italian autonomist concept of the social factory to explain why this happens. In the era of the factory, there was a relatively clear boundary between work and life. You clocked in, you clocked out. Production happened inside the walls. The social factory dissolves that boundary. The entire social body becomes a site of production. Your conversations, your creativity, your relationships, your leisure time, all of it is potentially raw material for the generation of value. This is not a conspiracy. No one sat in a boardroom and decided to monetize human sociability. It emerged, as Terranova argues, from the structural logic of late capitalism encountering digital networks. But the result is the same: the colonization of everyday life by the demands of production. Trebor Scholz, writing more than a decade after Terranova and surveying the landscape of social media platforms, puts the point with brutal clarity. Quote, "All of life is put to work." When Facebook was valued at $100 billion in 2011, that valuation reflected something real: 7 years of accumulated user data. Your profile, your connections, your likes, your messages, your location check-ins. The platform is free to use, but the cost is your data, your attention, and your social life. As Scholz writes, quote, "Oligarchs capture and financialize our productive expression and take flight with our data. We, the users, are sold as the product." What makes this particularly interesting from a labor theory perspective is how thoroughly it updates Marx's framework. Marx's alienated worker at least knows why they are working. They can feel the estrangement, the coercion, the exhaustion. The platform economy has engineered a form of labor that doesn't feel like labor at all. Scrolling is fun. Sharing is social. Connecting is pleasurable. The genius of the system is that it has made exploitation feel like leisure. And there is a hidden layer here that we identified in our earlier discussion of the Global South. Much of the labor that makes AI systems function, content moderation, image labeling, data cleaning, is outsourced to workers in Kenya, India, and the Philippines, earning a few dollars a day to build the infrastructure of our digital economy. Scholz calls this the, quote, "violence of participation," not just the extraction of value, but the structural invisibility of the people whose labor makes extraction possible. The neon is beautiful. The human cost is carefully kept off screen. Let's bring this back to the texts. Sleep Dealer, Alex Rivera's 2008 film, is a cyberpunk narrative that makes the social factory literal and visible. The workers in Tijuana sell their immaterial labor, their attention, their dexterity, their nervous systems, wired to robots across the border, while their bodies remain physically trapped in Mexico. The work is entirely immaterial. What crosses the border is pure labor power, stripped of the worker. It is Marx's estrangement made architectural. The body stays on one side, the work happens on the other. Rivera imagines what the social factory looks like when you build an actual building for it and make the exploitation explicit. In Machinehood, S.B. Divya extends this logic into the body itself. Workers in her near-future world use pharmaceutical drugs to keep themselves competitive with AI systems, to remain productive enough to matter. When the boundary between your labor capacity and your biological functions dissolves completely, when you are literally chemically optimizing your nervous system for the demands of the market, you have arrived at the endpoint of biopolitical production. Life doesn't just serve production, life becomes production. And remember what we said in our first discussion. Cyberpunk's bad faith is that it knows the system is oppressive and seduces us with it anyway. Terranova's insight helps us understand why. The culture of the internet, the creativity, the community, the gift economy is not separate from capitalism's logic. It is produced within it, by it, and ultimately for it. The neon is beautiful because we made it beautiful, and capital is waiting to sell it back to us. Technology, as this course has insisted from the beginning, is never neutral. It carries the economic structures of the world that built it. When you scroll, when you share, when you stream, you are participating in a system designed to extract value from the most intimate dimensions of your social life. That is not a reason for despair. It is, however, a reason to read carefully. As we move through machinehood and toward our final unit, I want you to keep asking, whose labor is being exploited in this narrative? What forms of work have been made invisible? Who built the neon and who got paid?